It's Romania Black. We're on episode 12 of Revolutionary Girl Utena, and yeah, last episode was a lot. Last episode hurt, like really hurt, and now Anthe is back with Kiryuu of all people, and Utena is probably going to go through a crisis because everything that she thought she knew has been tossed upside down. So what can we do about it? But so yeah, I've got a lot of comments to talk about with this episode before we start, so we need to just go ahead and dive right in. But I wanted to rip the band-aid off this episode. As soon as episode 11 was over, I was like, I know I want to watch episode 12 because we all know what's going to happen. Utena is going to go through this period of feeling down on herself and this feeling of questioning and just being like, have I been doing it wrong this whole time? And I talked last episode about all the different ways in which she might find a way to rebuild herself. And I have to tell myself, as someone that loves stories and as someone that empathizes with a lot of characters, I have to tell myself, okay, Utena's going to go through a period where it's really going to suck, but we're only on episode 12, and we have 39 episodes in a movie, so there's plenty of time for her character to do like the Dark Knight Rises and crawl her way back up to face Bane, aka Kiryuu Touga. So but let's dive into these comments because we need to get, I'm just like, I want to rip the band-aid off and watch this episode, but we need to talk about the comments first and foremost. Grishnash 2600 says that Anno based Kaoru in Neon Genesis Evangelion off of Ikuhara, who's the creator of the show, Revolutionary Girl. And Ikuhara in episode 4 actually had a tie-in where there was a Sailor Moon episode that he did that involved a gag with the snails, like what happens with Nanami in episode 4. So I thought that those were two really cool tie-ins. I remember when I was watching Neon Genesis, there were a lot of people that talked about Revolutionary Girl, and that's around the time people were recommending me watch this show. They're like, oh, if you like Neon Genesis, you'll really like Revolutionary Girl because Anno was a big fan of Ikuhara. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I'm glad we're finally coming full circle with that. Francesca White 4166 talks about in episode 7 that with the Shadow Girls, and also Lyndon kind of said the exact same thing on Patreon with this, but the Shadow Girls, basically their story in episode 7, which is the Jury episode, is talking about the highlight of Jury. Jury doesn't want to admit that she believes or wants miracles to happen. She doesn't want to admit that she's actually hoping there's a way for her to find love with that girl that she grew up with in the future. So I like that both Lyndon and Francesca White talked about that. H Banana 7 noted how Jury notes how hard it is for someone to actually to divulge or to live their truth, and how Utena takes the power of Dios for granted, which is such a great thing to note because last episodes it's like, yeah, she's taken this power for granted and taken the duels for granted this whole time and underestimated them, and now she's seeing what's going on. And so I really liked the idea that Jury kind of notes Utena is performing this gender subversion, but she's not really living it, which is kind of to Jury's disappointment, right? And so I liked that not only that, but Oliver Jajado, we'll talk about their comment here in a second because it kind of ties into it, but how modern times make us forget how scandalous and risque this series was originally, which we'll talk a little bit about that here to come. But Zanacho also notes, or Zanecho notes, that Jury might be described as a closeted femme because she presents with this masculine air in her clothing, her hairstyle, and how she presents herself as kind of almost like really aggressive. But then she dresses very feminine with her hair looser and with more frills when she's not around people. And she kind of feels betrayed by Utena when she finds out that Utena was influenced by a man in how she dresses. And Jury's like, oh, so that's not how you really are. You're just performing. You're just pretending. Whereas for Jury, it's something personal. She is, homosexual. And so for her, it's like, oh, you're just pretending. You don't actually believe those things. Okay. And it's really funny because I'm reading a Don Maya series called Scum, Villain, Self-Saving System right now. And MXTX is the author for that. She has 3 different series that she's wrote, and I'm reading the 3rd one. And a lot of her themes deal with same-sex relationships, and her protagonists a lot of times are characters who don't really realize that they're into the same sex until certain events happen that kind of reveals their sexuality, whereas they hadn't thought about it previously. And so a lot of the main characters of those series kind of remind me of Utena. Utena's never really questioned her sexuality, and she hasn't really seemed interested in anyone. Like, Wakaba's been sitting there throwing herself at Utena, and Utena's been like, and no guy has really confessed to her, probably because they're terrified of her, and how powerful she is. So she's never really had to question her sexuality or who she likes, because she's never really had to come to terms with that. And so now it seems like with Anthe, she might be coming to terms with that. And that reminds me a lot of MXTX's writing, which is really interesting to me. So I've got a couple comments by Jajado that Oliver Jajado I want to talk about for episode 12. They write, Utena is talking about Juri's supposed hidden side, being like a wild animal, but we later see that there's more to her than meets the eye, and it's maybe the other way around. I've always seen her cold and strong persona as a defense mechanism, and her more masculine presenting uniform to help her get taken more seriously as a student council member. Yeah! And, this came out in the 90s, which doesn't seem that long ago, but yeah, even back then, if you wanted to be taken seriously, you kind of had to put on an air of, think of Legally Blonde that came out in 2000. I think of growing up in the 90s and all of the women that I saw in media that were taken seriously did kind of present a more masculine tone in terms of their aggressive, straightforward directness and how they saw men present themselves in the workplace. You didn't see like a girl in a frilly pink dress being taken seriously. And that's just how it was in media for a very long time, even if it wasn't an accurate reflection of reality. And so now, of course, it's totally different. We're a lot more progressive than we were in the 90s. And so that kind of leads to their other commentary and trivia, noting that even with the reveal at the end, the English dubbing team still didn't understand it, and even episodes later, they were wondering about Juri's character and what was up with the locket. Apparently not even Juri's voice actress herself, but only Crispin Freeman, who voiced Touga in one of his first ever roles, apparently understood the message, and he had to point out to them that Juri was a lesbian. He had to convince them to rewatch the episode until they actually believed him. There was a short Q&A where he talks about it on YouTube, and I'm like, yeah. And now some people were talking about that in the comments about how scandalous this was back then. Now we actually have media that have LGBTQ representation to where you see some same-sex couples and you see individuals who are gay or lesbian or non-binary or asexual. You see those characters now, and they are more transparent in media and recognizable. And so it doesn't seem as you're like, oh, okay. But back then it was like, well, what does that mean? And it's like, because it wasn't represented in the media itself. I remember it was such a huge deal in Sailor Moon to have, Uranus and Neptune be two characters that were in a same-sex relationship. Like, that was a huge deal. And the Deke dub that I watched made them cousins, because we'd rather have cousins making out on screen. That seems more acceptable for children to watch than to admit they're just two women that are in love, because America. Yeah, so it is so interesting to look back, because I feel like younger audiences watching this show will not find it scandalous at all. But for an older audience that might be like, yeah, back in the day, that was a pretty big deal. And so I think that's so fascinating. It's almost like this show almost becomes like a time capsule in a way, right? So Oliver Jajado also talks about the episode 7 commentary, Unfulfilled Juri. The story came together quickly as a story about relationships. He and she only appear within Juri's memories. The ending in the final script is different than it was in the first draft. The endgame is still about getting a better idea of who Juri really is. That didn't change. But the first draft ended on a could it be sort of note. As the script was finalized, I decided to come right out and say she was in love with a girl. Juri's story is a metaphor of unrequited love. If you watch it from that perspective, I think it's an easy one for anybody to understand. Her design referenced the heroine of Miss Saito's short manga, Himigoto no Natsu. It's about a brother and sister entering a forbidden relationship. Oh, I enjoyed the total mismatch between the heroine's sweet prettiness and the story's bold development. I think we borrowed her looks because we wanted to hide something behind prettiness. I love it too. And I like that as well. Like, Juri's character she is very feminine. She is very beautiful, and she's not, stereotypically, there is a stereotype on women that I feel like Japanese anime kind of subverts that. In Western media, especially during the 90s, there was a very big stereotype on same-sex relationships with women and what those women were like in the media and how they were portrayed, and it was not an accurate representation of every lesbian relationship. And so I do like the idea that Ikuhara is saying, I wanted to just come out and say, yeah, Juri liked another girl. That's the thing. And it makes so much sense for her character because she's struggling with trying to grapple that part of her identity, because you can't tell people in this 90s school, because how are they going to judge you? Are they going to think less of you? It's not the norm, so you're not going to fit in, and high school is really a time where fitting in is the safe way to go. So like I said last week, I feel like Juri could be somebody that Utena goes to for advice on this subject. I feel like Saionji could be someone. I feel like Mickey and Touga are so close to being on the outs with one another. I feel like Mickey is on his last nerve with Touga, at least from the last couple episodes. So we'll just have to wait and see. But I thought that was really interesting. So I've talked for over 10 minutes, but thank you all for noting that. I think it's really important. So yeah. Anyway, we're not going to waste any more time. We are going to dive right into episode 12 of Revolutionary Girl Utena, but keep those comments coming. I'm super excited to see where it goes. But we're going to start this episode here in 3, 2, 1, and I'll see you all on the other side. I'm just now realizing the missed opportunity I would have had to watch this show on Wednesdays, so I could say on Wednesdays we wear pink in reference to Mean Girls, but also because Viva la Pink! Viva la Utena! I was like, oh my gosh. Well, I sure am glad that we got this out of the way now. I'm glad it only took us an episode. Thank goodness, because I was afraid going into this episode that it was gonna be an arc, that it was gonna be like sad Utena arc, because let me tell you, in Neon Genesis, sad Shinji is an arc. It's basically the whole series, but it's definitely a period of time that doesn't ever end. So I was like, what are we gonna do? So we actually had a lot happen in this episode. It definitely was a transition episode. It definitely was like Utena hit a funk, she hit a wall. Now, do I think Utena, her work is done and she can just, chalk up her hands and say that she's all good to go? No. I think that the work starts now, but she needed to get Himamiya. She needed to get Anthy back over where she could hang out with her and talk with her and, have that friendship again. And now we got to go somewhere with it. So I'm really curious because Anthy seemed to realize something in this episode, and I'm curious what that's going to entail and lead to. And we don't get to see Toga's reaction to all of this. He just kind of is like, and I'm like, ha ha, bitch, take that, sir. We're going to talk about him. Now he gets a Saionji treatment. So the funny thing is that what Himamiya does to the sword by protecting it and giving it this power boost, I don't think it was the same thing that's been happening this whole time. So unless Touga thought it was the same thing, but he was wrong, which I think is the case, I'm rather curious. And now Utena's like, she knows that if Himamiya kisses the sword, which we'll talk about that whole metaphor, then she's like, okay, it imbues the sword with some kind of protection, until Anthy realizes that Utena is acting and has similar circumstances to the prince. So where does that leave us? We don't know, but we're going to put Utena up here on the map. There's a lot of fun stuff that happened in this episode, and Wakaba gets MVP award of the episode. First and foremost, Wakaba was an MVP. I was rooting for Wakaba. I loved her in this episode, and what I loved most about her is that even after Utena slapped her back, and even after all that happened, she still went over to Utena and was like, hey, what's up? I'm not going to let you leave until we talk this out. Something's going on. I want to know what it is. And I was like, that is best friend vibes. That is best friend vibes. Wakaba is a bestie. She is a best girl. And what I love about it is so often in stories like these, because whenever Utena first slapped her, what I thought was it was going to be the very stereotypical, like the best friend being like, well, you've changed, and if this is how you're going to be, then I'm not going to be around you, and just like leaves her. But that's not what Wakaba does. Wakaba sticks around. She says, hey, I know something's up. You're clearly not acting like yourself. You clearly are distraught. Sit down. Tell me what's happening. And that's what a best friend does. They don't run away from you. They make sure you're okay. And they push through and be like, so you're going to sit down, talk to me, and I don't care if you slap me again, but we're going to get to the bottom of this. And I was like, best friend Wakaba. She, at the beginning of the series, I didn't know how I was going to feel about her, because she starts the series off being like kind of that just super hyper energetic friend she wasn't annoying, but she was just kind of a lot. And so I was like, is this how she's going to be? What part is she going to play? And this episode, she's MVP. She like helps Utena get out of her funk. And I'm like, good for you, Wakaba. I like Lucille Bluth. Good for you. Good for her. So let's dive back into this episode, shall we? They, of course, have to just gut us with that opening again, talking about how she lost. And the dialogue here is a little bit different, so I thought it was worth going back to, with Touga saying, despite your princely grandstanding, at the end of the day, you're just a girl. Well, thank you, Mr. Misogynist. Look at you. So basically, let's backpedal here. That Kiryuu, describing her as just pretending to be a prince, and quote unquote, you're just a girl. Well, I feel like, cue Gwen Stefani, I'm just a girl. Like, just have that song playing throughout this entire episode. Might as well. That was like the lead up song to her facing him. That would have been great. Somebody, I'm sure, has edited that. I'm sure. Kiryuu's kind of sexist. And that he's like, you could call it misogyny, but Kiryuu we're going to put Touga up here. He has this view that obviously it's the prince's job to be the protector and quote unquote in charge of the princess. And look, I am all for chivalry. I am all for a gentleman. I am all for someone that is being kind and considerate to a lady. I'm all for that. I think it can go both ways. You can have a lady that's kind and considerate to a man. Absolutely. But Kiryuu takes it to like a very possessive, misogynist level where he's like, well, it's of course a prince's job to protect the princess. But also he's a effing hypocrite, because then in front of the lonely princess he's supposed to be protecting, he goes and cheats on her and makes out with another woman in front of her. Like, he is a damn hypocrite, and he's slime. So we might as well just put it up here that he is very much a hypocrite, very two-faced, and very slimy. And he's just pretending to be this charming gentleman, but he is sludge. Right? And I hate that he tells her that. He's like, well, you're just a woman, so you can't do anything. I also realized at the end, during the discussion of last episode, I thought that maybe it was some foreshadowing of her in like the armor from the OP, but no, it was just a silhouette of her after that battle. And he's like, whatever you may have hoped for remains an unfulfilled fantasy. I think this presents a good chance for you to return to being a good little normal girl. Don't you agree? So he basically thinks, he tells Utena that Utena's love, or whatever her relationship, I don't even know. I don't even think that Kiryuu thinks it's love, but her relationship with Anthe is a fantasy. It's like King Triton and Little Mermaid. A human and a mermaid? Two women loving each other? What? I'm like, well, jury, right, Kiryuu? So, but he believes that Utena should her best bet is to be a normal girl. I put normal in quotation marks, right? And so, and all of this is not necessarily what Touga believes, right? he doesn't necessarily even, now I think that there's a possibility he does believe that. He's like, silly girl, pretending that you could actually protect Anthe. No. Be a normal girl like everyone else and know your place. Get back in the kitchen. Like, I do think that that part could definitely be something Touga genuinely believes. But the ulterior motive behind this is also that he sees Utena as a threat to him being able to revolutionize the world with Anthe's power. So again, best case scenario is, well, I'll just get Utena to get out of my hair, and the best way for her to do that is to go back to being an aka normal girl. And so yeah, he's like, don't you agree? And then of course, it is not lost on me that Anthe goes from calling Utena-sama to Tenjo-san, like in the same breath, just like what she did with Saionji. And now Utena, I feel like Utena now has a better understanding of why Saionji was so distraught, because now she's experienced it too. So maybe her and Saionji can relate one of these days. But it's really sad. And then we go back to the classroom and they're like, Tenjo-san, Tenjo Utena-san, Bueller. And Wakaba, of course, notices that she's absent. So the episode is called Perhaps for Friendship's Sake. And I think that that can go in a lot of directions. It can talk about Wakaba and Utena. It can talk about Utena and Anthe. Because here's the thing. Utena isn't necessarily saying that she loves Anthe romantically or sexually at this point. But she has come to recognize Anthe as a friend. And she believes that, I mean, the real work to be done at this point, by the time we get to here, is now that she has Himamiya back, now that she has her back, the next step is to help her get her autonomy. Or basically break this spell of the Rose Bride. Because it is true. Utena doesn't like the duels. She thinks it's stupid, but she also thinks that it's stupid that this whole Rose Bride thing is even a thing. She's like, Himamiya should be able to choose whatever path that she wants to. And as much as we, the audience, would like Himamiya to do this on her own, there is clearly something blocking her from being able to do that. So I do think that while Utena needs to realize that she's not the one that needs to be the catalyst to set Himamiya free, it needs to be Himamiya herself, I do think that she's right in that, look, you being with Touga is not helping anything. Touga ain't going to help you become an autonomous person. He's just going to have you on a leash like a damn dog. So I'm going to try to help you, and we'll do this, we'll work this through together as friends. So that's where we are now by the end of the episode. But where we go from there, I didn't watch the preview, so I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. So I think the worst part is that Utena's just stuck in this house all by herself. Like, Himamiya leaves to go, I guess, live with Touga. I'll be honest, I was fully expecting a... Kiryuu Touga reminds me a little bit of Prince Diamond from Sailor Moon in the season with that. He reminds me a lot of Prince Diamond, and Prince Diamond is a very, very conflicting character if you've watched Sailor Moon. And so I was expecting us to cut to the bedroom where Toga's like laying on the bed and there's all these women around him. I was expecting us to cut to that and Anthe's just in the corner dusting. Like, that's what I thought we'd get. It's like he's like surrounded by all these women that are just like fondling him, and then Anthe's like scrubbing down the toilets in the back room. That's where I thought we were gonna go to, but we didn't touch base on that. Probably for the better. And then Choo Choo's just like nibbling on his crackers watching this all go down. That's what I thought we were gonna get. We did not get such things. Probably for the better in the long run. But Wakaba instantly, I like that there's a lot of visual cues in this episode that are not verbal. There's a lot of non-verbal cues that this episode brings out that's very much show not tell, and I'm a big fan of show not tell. And so, like, Wakaba's knocking on the door and she sees that Anthe's name's been taken off of the door plaque there. It's been ripped off, and she's like, oh, something's up. Anthe's not here. We don't know what happened yet, but I like that Wakaba's not dumb. She's very hyperactive and has a lot of energy, and she's very extroverted, but she's not dumb. And so she's like, can I come in? She's like, oh, good, yay. I'm glad that, like, Wakaba's instantly like, yes, good, you're gonna let me in. We'll note, Utena's still on the top bunk. She's still on top, y'all. Also, I really like her pajamas. But yeah, she's basically just heartbroken and sullen because, things have gone so horribly. And she's like, "Do you have a cold?" "Nope." "You feel all right? You're just playing hooky." And then she's like, "Did you guys have a fight?" And Utina's like, "Well, kind of." And then we see that Anthony just gathered up her stuff, including her octopus. That's what's hanging out of the suitcase, is the damn octopus. And just left. And then left her there. And then that's when Wakaba also notices that her uniform is torn. Now, she worries that something bad happened to Utena. And that's not exactly what happened. So the good news is that Utena's girly girl uniform is shredded beyond measure. I also thought during the duel that Kiryuu was gonna get her down to where she was. I've been reading too much Berserk, so I've been reading too much Miura, where he would have no problem stripping a female character down to where her breasts were exposed. I've been just Stockholm syndromed into that series the last 6 months, so I was expecting it to get down where she was practically nude and Kiryuu was gonna make some kind of sexist comment about it. Thank God it was a bit more demure and mindful than that. So thank God that was not the case, and that she actually just ends up. We'll talk about that whole exposure and everything when we get to the duel. But now all we have to do is just sew up that sleeve, and we'll be fine. Or maybe she'll cut it off and just go like Joe Dirt and just have the sleeves ripped off and just show off her guns to the world. Why not? But Wakaba did offer to fix it, so it's fine. So yeah, all the girls watching her walk to school. What's interesting is that the girls still have a crush on her, so it doesn't matter. I think that that's part number one here, is about clothing and identity, and also about perception, about the perception that it brings. Because the other girls still have a crush on her, even though she changes her uniform in her clothing, the girls at the school still have a crush on her. They're still blushing. They're still like, "Oh my God." Even though, if you'll notice, there are no guys paying attention to her. She walks to school and they're like, "Oh, is that Tenjo senpai?" And they're like, "Oh, that uniform, it really suits her," even though she looks absolutely miserable wearing it. She looks so sad. They're like, "I like this look better." Of course, what's interesting is none of the guys seem to notice her. They're all girls staring at her in the uniform. And Wakaba being like, "Oh, well, you're really popular. This is what the girls want you to wear. Isn't that something?" I think that that's a sign in itself that just because she wears those clothes and just because the girls seem to prefer it in some regard, it didn't change how she was perceived by the student body. They still see her the same way. But Utena is definitely feeling a bit more distraught. She's like, "Well, you've taken to the uniform." And she's like, "Yeah, it's normal." If this episode is not a representation of basically accepting your queerness, I don't exactly know what you want me to say about it otherwise, but it's the idea of being normal. Now, I am going to say, you can definitely interpret this to not being a coming out of the closet, or you can definitely, there are ways to interpret it where it's not talking about queerness, but that conversation is definitely an interpretation you can have. So the idea of being normal versus being different. And not only being different, but what makes, I think more importantly, what makes your normal. Because at the end of the day, if we're gonna get technical with it, the idea of normalcy is conforming to a standard, the usual, the typical, and the expected. So that is, that's what normalcy is. It's conforming to a standard or what is expected. So for Utena, she decides by the end of this episode that her normal, what is to be typical, usual, or expected of her, may actually be different than everyone else's. And while that's not technically the definition of normal, it is her normal. It's what's expected of her. Because Wakaba points out, she's like, how you're acting now is not your normal. You're trying to conform to something that's not you. So everyone's normal is going to be different. That's kind of the irony of it. right? You're just conforming to a standard, but that's not your normal. And I love Wakaba for pointing it out. I love it. The part that's so insane here is that Anthe shows up with Choo Choo just eating the crackers, and Wakaba's like, oh, hey, morning, what's up? And then Utena, I give Utena props. She like turns around, she's like, okay, good morning, Himamiya. And Himamiya's like, well, good morning, Tenjo-san. Like, she still doesn't say Utena-sama, she just says Tenjo-san, and acts like nothing's wrong. And Wakaba's like, wow, you guys seem totally cordial. Is something the matter? But Utena's like, oh, yeah, you're just going to school and you're going to ignore me now. You just are pleasant. I think that's the part of it. She's like, you just are polite because you have to be. And that's such a heartbreaking thing, is that Himamiya doesn't have any autonomy, so her being polite is just expected. That's her normal. But Utena's like, this is not right. She's like, clearly stuff has gone down, but you can't even... And even Utena's like, you just kept walking. She's like, I have to be normal. And Wakaba's like, you did fight, didn't you? There is this notion that Utena's like, well, I have to be normal about this. And a lot of it is damage control for Utena, because she's like, I don't want to break down and have a meltdown again. And I have to keep moving on with my life. I can't just sit in my room all day. I have to go back to school. I have to find some sense of normalcy. But the idea of she's realizing the idea of going each day to school without being around Himamiya and without having to worry about Touga showing up is not a normal that she wants to accept. It's not something that she wants to deal with. So anyway, we go back to the student council meeting, and I was like, I wonder how this is gonna go. And sure enough, Kiryuu is just sitting there, pleased as punch, looking in his not at all heterosexual sitting position, being like, well, as you can see, the Rose Bride and I are engaged. I love that that's so obvious, because Juri and Miki know what it means for her to be there. They know. So him just saying it is him just being a bastard and rubbing it in their faces. And I just love the response where he's like, any questions? And Miki's like, none. I love Miki's like, you bastard, why would we have questions for you about it? Kiryuu is just fishing. He just wants them to ask how it happened, right? And Miki's like, I ain't biting. I'm not doing it. But Juri does. Juri's like, how'd you win? And he's like, oh, with skill and grace. And she's like, sure, Jan. She's reading a book called Romance Symphony? Or does it say, yeah, Romance Symphony. I'm going to look that up real quick and see if that's anything. Romance Symphony. Well, it's a song by Big Naughty, but I don't think that's it. Romance Symphony. Is there any... it is a book by Saito Chiho. Oh! An illustration art book. Oh, for Utena. Okay, I'm not going to look any more into it. Okay, never mind. Nope, it's an anime art book for the series. We're not going to look into that. Spoilers. But funny that. So that must be... We must tie back to that. I like that Juri is reading it. He's like, with skill and grace is what I'd hoped you'd think. Kiryuu is just so pleased. He's just preening like a peacock. He is so proud of himself. He's like, look at what I've done. Just aren't you so impressed with me? Aren't you so proud of me? And Juri's like, we really don't care. We're of course not. And she's like, I'm just curious about the details. And he's like, well, I rescued this lonely princess here as the noble prince that I am. That's all. So, if we're going to go back here to Touga, there's this idea that he wants to be the prince. We talked about this back in the episode with Saionji when he got Saionji kicked out, that Kiryuu Touga, he wants to be a gentleman. He wants to be the prince. He wants to be the knight in shining armor, but he's slime and he's dirty and filthy and he knows it and he's putting on this persona. And now we know from the last episode, the lonely princess he was talking about was Himamiya, not Utena. He's like, I'm just being the noble prince. And I like that Juri's probably thinking, you are not the noble prince. You just want to think that you are, but you're very much not. I feel like she like vomited in her mouth when he said that. And she's like, oh, a prince, huh? The way she says, oh, a prince, huh? Is just like, yeah, sure. You keep telling yourself that. Mm-hmm. He's like, a play is hardly a play if the prince and princess don't get together in the final act. So Kiryuu's been treating this whole thing like a setup, and he's like, well, now I've won. Now I've gotten with my princess. It's all over. I'm going to get the power of Dios and be in charge, and that's all there is to it. But Juri does not seem to suspect that. She's like, oh, bold of you to presume this was the final act. I freaking love Juri's character. I love Juri's character because she does not put up with him at all. At all, which we'll talk about later with the sword. But she does not put up with him at all, and she's like, well, how bold of you. Bold words for someone not on a unicycle. She's like, how presumptive of you to think that this is over. I feel like Juri, from her experience dueling Utena, maybe has gathered that Utena does care for Himamiya, and Juri, being kind of in a similar boat as Utena, or a boat adjacent to Utena, kind of knows what that feels like and knows that Kiryuu has no idea. And so then Miki's like, indeed. He's like, yes, agreed. Miki is just, he's over it. Miki is over this whole council. And then Himamiya is like, well, you know, if we're just standing here being in the way, we can wait outside. Which basically is her being like, I don't want to be here. And he's like, no, I want to show you off in front of everybody. He's like, I want you to see her. And she's like, okay. And he's like, I want you by my side at all times. And Juri just looks disgusted. She's just like, ew. And Miki is like, I don't want to hear this. He's like, seeing as you are my bride. Because Miki knows exactly, Miki and Juri both know, especially Miki, what it's like to want Himamiya for their own purposes and it not work out, especially Miki. And so for Kiryuu Touga, and Miki knows that Touga is a bastard that has been like messing around with his twin sister, with all these other women. So the fact that now they have to watch Himamiya stand there as he's like, I want you by my side always. Of course they're disgusted by it. So like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if they turned on him and were like, no way, Jose. But yeah. So then we have the whole cafeteria scene. Oh my God. This scene was insane. That Wakaba's like, look, if you don't want to say anything, you don't have to, but you're being weird. You're not being yourself. And she's like, I just want you to know, you're not acting like yourself either. And I love that Wakaba just kind of stares at her like, you're starting to make me mad because you're not being you. You're being sad. You're not talking about... And I like that Wakaba says, look, I'm not asking you to tell me. You don't have to if you're uncomfortable, but it is weirding me out that you're not being yourself. And around that time, she's like, if you think I'm going to drop it, that's when Touga shows up. The audacity, the gall, the gumption of this man. Here's the thing. Touga, if Touga had just left them alone, again, Touga is like, he digs his own grave. If he had just left them alone and didn't show up for this moment, then she may have ended up just being miserable and sad, and Wakaba would have just kept pushing her. But Kiryuu's kind of the catalyst of all this. Because then he's like, well, I heard that you had transformed into this lady. I'm like, she just put on a different shirt. But it's quite something. And then there's Himamiya. And again, Utena doesn't care about Kiryuu. It's Himamiya being there. And that's when she gets sad. It's like, why do you want to see your ex when they're around somebody new and they're just trying to act like nothing's wrong? Like, that makes her feel even worse. And they're not even in a relationship like that yet. So, and then of course she's like, well, that uniform does look splendid on you. And Wakaba's like, you know, he's being like an asshole. Like, just tell him to leave. And he's like, wouldn't you let me take you out to dinner this Sunday? And Wakaba's like, ew, what a creep. And he's like, without the bride. And he's trying to just like, and he's so slimy there where he like puts his hand on her and just like, he's like, doesn't that sound good? And she's like, come on, Utena, tell him to get lost. Give him an answer. And she's like, keep your hands off of her. I like that Wakaba is so uncomfortable by this because, yeah, he just basically is being so predatory, just putting his hand on her shoulder and holding her hand and like pulling her in, being like, let's just go out, me and you sometime. And Wakaba's like, that's creepy. Get away from her. Like, get out. You're not welcome here. And she's like, Utena, tell him to leave, that he's a jerk. But Utena's like, doesn't know what to say. And it almost looks like he kisses her hand, but I know he doesn't. And then she's like, keep your hands off my Utena-sama. Now, this whole scene is a really good representation of kind of what we saw last episode. You have Touga putting his hands on Utena, And Wakaba's like, hey, she's my friend, she's mine, get your hands off her. And it's kind of a parallel to last week when we had Kiryuu putting his hands on Anthe, and Utena's like, hey, get your hands off her, she's my friend, don't do that. So it's kind of like a parallel of that, right? But then here's the moment, because Wakaba, when Kiryuu looks over to her, he's like, is Utena gonna say anything? And Wakaba's like, come on, Utena, stand up for yourself. And she's like, if you don't like him, tell him. And Utena just doesn't know what to say, because Utena's so conflicted. She's like, is this guy my prince? I thought he was, but it doesn't feel right. And now I'm questioning, do I even want him to be my prince? What about Anthe? And so Utena's got all these conflicting, thoughts in her head, and she can't say anything. And Wakaba, that's when she goes to splash the water, and it hits Anthe instead of the two of them. Because, of course, I like that Kiryuu moves out of the way just in time for her to splash Anthe instead of himself. Because, bitch, you're not getting that red hair wet at all. He manages to separate them, so that's good. But then she's like, but it's your fault, too. You're just standing there spacing out. I love Wakaba's like, you're involved in this, Anthe. Why don't you do something? But the moment that she blames Anthe for the whole incident, it would be like, going back to last week, it would be like Utena blaming Anthe for what's happening. And in some respects, yeah, Anthe doesn't have any autonomy. But in other respects, it's like Anthe has no autonomy, so she really has no choice. So she's kind of just forced to go along with this, and that's what makes Utena mad. And what causes her to slap her. And I love that Wakaba slaps her back. She just gives that cheeky smirk. I love that. I'm going to take a picture of it. It's probably going to be the thumbnail. I don't know. We'll see what fits. But that slap, I love that she smacks her back. And she's like, well, would you look at that? You can't act for yourself. And then Kiryuu's like, oh, well, your friend is quite perky. Let's talk alone next time. And then leaves with Anthe. And Utena can't just let her go. She's like, hey, you got wet. Here's my handkerchief with my initials embroidered on it for you. Take it and go. And so Anthe says, well, thank you very much, Tenjo-san. I was expecting her to almost throw it back, but she doesn't. She takes it. And then Utena's like, stay out of my business, okay? And Wakaba's like, no, I'm not stopping. And Utena's like, well, I don't get it. And she's like, well, I do. And she's like, I'm not giving up on you. And she does run off, but I was afraid she was going to run off and not show back up, but that's not what ends up happening. Because Utena's like going through all of this being like, she's like, I know you're trying to help Wakaba, but I'm so lost. I don't know what to do now. I can't get Anthe back. I don't even know what to do. Am I supposed to fight him again? I don't even know if it's worth it. And I think a big thought through Utena's head is she like, was I just performing? Was I just pretending to be this prince that I'm actually not, as it comes to find out? And so am I just going to go back to being this helpless girl that was crying at my parents' funeral without any sense, was it all a big lie? And it's so sad, right? Of course, then we go to this phone conversation where it's just Anthe and Choo-Choo and Kiryuu. And I wanted to go back to this conversation. He's like, oh, I see. And he says, what are you saying? Not at all. I'm always thinking about you. I feel like it's the girl he meets in the garden, right? And he's like, I've heard that story. And he says, no, I hadn't heard that. Yes. I like that he just has a rose flip phone. Why not? And he's like, well, I'm not particularly busy at the moment. Again, the idea is like, oh, I'm not busy. I'm just in front of my fiance. No big deal. We're not doing anything. What an asshole. What a perfect asshole. And he's like, I'm not lying. And he's like, I'll be there immediately. So he's like, oh, I'm sorry, Anthe. He's like, wait here for a moment. And she's like, sure. And then he just leaves. And she just sits there. But when she looks over in the other chair, the person that she sees looking back at her is Utena. And she just stares at the chair like so it gives us a glimpse that even though Anthe is not able to act on her own thoughts right now because she's stuck as the Rose Bride, she does have her own thoughts, and she is thinking about Utena, Like, she does think about her independently and kind of wants her to be there. So, to me, that's so huge. Like, the fact that we get a little bit of insight into her character and see what she sees is so important. And so I'm glad that we got that moment, right? And then she looks at the embroidered handkerchief. So yeah, so then I love that Wakaba's waiting on her at the gates. She's like, bitch, I ain't letting you leave until we talk this out. And so Tina's like, well, and then Wakaba's like, no, don't just think you can say sorry and that's going to be that. She's like, we're going to talk it out. We're going to get to the root of this. Go Wakaba. Go. MVP of the episode. Love her for it. And she's like, so it was the president, was it? I love the roses there. It was his fault that you're not your usual self. She's like, I don't really get it, to be honest. Like, why are you even wearing this uniform? She's like, well, it's normal, isn't it? And Wakaba's like, no, it's not normal. I mean, not being normal is normal for you. She's like, your normal is not the same as ours. And this is not it. She's like, so this kind of normal is not your normal. It's very complicated. And she's like, my kind of normal. And her kind of normal is being with Anthe, wearing the black jacket, being the two of them. She's like, so you're shutting down again, aren't you? She's like, this Utena is so uncool. It's like you had something stolen. And what's interesting is, like we talked last week about the idea that Utena had to realize what she was performing, right? She was putting on this uniform, she was putting on a uniform, acting like the prince, and letting that define her. But now it's like, the reality is that doesn't define her. It's her relationships and her feeling towards others that help to define her character. So without Anthe, she's like, I don't feel myself, and I don't feel like without her as part of my friend circle, as part of my life, it doesn't feel right anymore. And so I like that Utena's coming to realize, she's like, being myself can involve being like a prince, but it's not because I'm trying to impress. Now, here's the thing. She does not have to impress or find her prince anymore. If Kiryuu says he's her prince, well, after this episode, she's like, I don't need you anymore. Like, I love that I love she doesn't come out and necessarily make this big declaration being like, you're not my prince, I don't need you. She kind of lets her actions speak for herself, but she kind of decides that if she's going to be, you know, quote unquote princely, it's not because she's trying to impress a man and meet back up with him and they're going to be happily ever after. She's going to be princely because it's her and what she wants for herself. And I'm like, yay, self-respect, self-love. Now, do I think it's perfect and she's completely actualized everything about her personality and understood her sexuality and everything? No, God, no. We've got a long way to go in terms of that. But I feel like step one is recognizing that she does not have to conform to the crowd. She can be different and it can be her. She's not imitating anybody. And I love it. And of course, the idea of something stolen, you could say that her innocence was stolen. You could say like the whole last episode was called gracefully plucked, ruthlessly plucked, right? Or the flower that was plucked or something. Which is a metaphor for, you know, in some cases stealing virginity, which was not sexual last episode, thank goodness. But I do feel like part of her identity was questioned and therefore stolen from her. And it's her reclaiming it back in this episode. And she's like, if someone took something from you, go take it back. And I love it. It's like, Wakaba's like, if you like Anthe this much and you want to fight for her, then Scott Pilgrim, go save Ramona. Let's go. You know, it gave me such Scott Pilgrim versus the World vibes, right? Which part of that series is about the main character, Scott, finding respect for himself and love for himself, and then the people he cares about. So I feel like Utena is going to go on a similar journey. But I love that Wakaba's like, if you want something, go get it. And that's, you know, fight for the lady that you like. Take it back. And Utena's like, you're right. I don't like this. I don't like what's going on. She's like, your normal is way cooler. And I love this moment where you get Utena and she slumps over and she kind of smirks. And at that point, you know that she's back. Like, you see the look on her face and she's like, oh, Wakaba, thank you. And she's like, I'm sorry I slapped you at the table. My bad. And she's like, I get it. It's like you said. This isn't really my normal, is it? I love she gives her a little forehead kiss. That's so cute. I'm going to go take back my normal. I love that. I love that she's like, look, Anthe is in my normal and I'm going to go get it back. And Wakaba's like, did I do something? So good for Utena. I love that moment. That's just, she's like, you know what? Anthe being in my life, that's normal to me. So I'm going to go get that back from that bastard. Absolutely. And what a way to justify it than to have the very next scene be Anthe is just gardening the roses like Kiryuu has told her to. And while she's doing that, he's over there making out with this girl. And that's when he sees Utena walking up. And what I love about it is that he thought she was going to come up to him like Belle to Gaston and request a dinner with him and an evening with him. He thought that she was going to do that. He really was so full of himself and had so much ego. He thought he was going to get her. He didn't see her glowering and glaring at him from across the way. He thought she was going to come up to him and actually do it. The bastard, so full of himself, right? As this other girl, like, leaves the greenhouse. Oh my God. And then she comes in, and Anthe's not paying attention. And he's like, you finally decided to come talk to me alone. She's like, yes. And he's like, so would you like to go out for dinner on Sunday? Like, says that in front of Anthe. Like, what an asshole. And then she's like, no, we're going now. And he's like, oh, so you don't want to wait. And him and Mia's just minding her own business. It almost seems like to me like him and Mia wants to have emotions inside that are different than what's presented on the outside, but she has no choice. And she's like, yeah, dueling arena forest now. And Kiryuu's like, oh, and that's when him and Mia's like, that's not what I thought she was gonna do. Yes, yes, yes. And then here we go. We don't even get the lead up music. Although I like the tells. The tell says, go to a normal school. Go to a normal school. Find a normal job. What is that monologue from Train Spotting? That was the only thing I could think of as soon as this was happening, right? Train Spotting monologue. It's Ewan McGregor says it at the very beginning. It's in the trailer for it. It's like the opening scene. Yes. So the dialogue from it. Oh, I want to find that spot there. It's one of my favorite parts where he talks about it. He's talking about choosing like whatever life you lead. Yes, choose life, choose a job, choose a starter home, choose dental insurance, leisure wear, matching luggage, choose your future. Why would anyone want to do a thing like that? Yep. So he has this big monologue in Train Spotting, which kind of goes along with this. Like, go find a normal job, a normal school. It's have a normal romance, enter a normal marriage, raise a normal family. That kind of normal has got nothing to do with us. We've done plenty and we've grown weary. So now it's time to return to our normal. And then there's like an alien spaceship that takes them away. I'm like, yes, yes, please. I hope this is not the last time we see the tells. I hope they come back next episode. I hope this was just a gag and that they'll be back next week. That's what I hope so. But yeah, so basically it's like, you know, why conform to society? That doesn't work for everybody. Not everyone's normal works as a uniform one size fits all. Sometimes our normals are different and that's fine. And for Utena, her normal is different. But I freaking love that Juri's like, take this sword and beat his scum ass. I love that Juri's like, get in there, girl. I definitely feel like Juri's like, look, you may not know if you're over here on Team L right now, but I have a feeling you might be. So if you want to join Team Yuri after a while, my name rhymes with it. I'll be here. So I love Juri's like, take this sword and kick his ass. Like and it was so simple. Just a simple little moment. She's like, use this. And she's like an indispensable prop for any final act. I love that Jury is just letting him eat those words. She's like, because Touga doesn't love Himamiya. All he loves is the power associated with her, but he doesn't love her. And Jury knows that Utena, whether it's platonic, whether it's romantic, whether it's sexual, whatever, she's like, she knows that she loves Himamiya and she's willing to fight for her. And Jury's like, I wish I had fought for the woman that I loved. So here, take this. But also, Mr. Kiryuu Touga thinks that this is the final act. So here's an indispensable prop to go help deal with that final act. I'm like, ah, bitch, please. Yes. Love it. Love it. So yeah, then she goes up there to fight. We just get right to it. Don't even have the opening crawl. But yep. And I like that her rose is pink instead of white this time, which is interesting. I wonder if there's a reason for that it's pink on her when she's in the uniform, but it's white. The only thing I can think of is maybe because the uniform she's wearing is white, so the white on white would look weird, so it needs to be pink, but then why not pink on black? So maybe there's a reason to it. Who knows? And he's like, well, why did you decide to challenge me? And that's because his fist is clenched like he's mad. And Utena's like, I decided there's something more important than you. In this moment, she realizes that she doesn't need the prince anymore. Finding the prince is not her main thing. It's, when it comes down to it, it's getting Anthe back. And he's like, fine, so you've come to your senses. So Touga tries to make it seem like he expected her to come, but I'm like, bitch, you were surprised. And now you're trying to spin it like you've expected her to come to her senses. Sure. So we get the shot of him taking the sword, like you would imagine. And so then they start to, he's like, what does he say there? He says, I think you understand this is no ordinary sword. But did you know that it can be used like this? And he says, Rose Bride, cast off your body and protect the sword. So in other words, basically, Anthe has this ability to use her body, or basically, it's not using her body. Basically, she has the ability to imbue her soul as the Rose Bride into the sword. Now, it's important to know that her soul does not entirely leave her body, because she starts crying later when she realizes the similarities that she notices between Utena and the prince, which we'll talk about. But she does basically she basically uses her essence and her spirit to protect the sword and like imbue it with extra powers. Gonna note, her leaning down to kiss the sword when it's basically like at eye level with Kiryuu's crotch kind of feels a little phallic, kind of feels a little sexual, feels a little symbolic. And Utena is even, and Kiryuu like looking down at her like she's giving him a blowjob is essentially what I got out of that. And it's really gross. And as she's like leaning to kiss the sword and Utena like looks away, I'm just saying it felt a little sexual, just a wee bit. It really did. I'm gonna get some screenshots of that while I'm doing that. Yeah, it did. But she did kiss it. And I think Utena was suggesting that, I think Utena maybe thought that when she kissed the sword, she was like gonna go inside of it because the sword went inside her. I feel like maybe she thought that was gonna happen, but instead it turns into like a lightsaber and her essence gets added to the sword and makes it into a Sith lightsaber. And he's like, well, isn't it beautiful? This is the power of the Rose Bride of Dios. So she has a power to help, I guess, charge the sword. But now here's the interesting part of that. That's not what's been happening with Utena and the prince. Because all the other times that the prince has come down from the castle and gotten inside of her, not the sword, but her, it's helped her to be a stronger fighter. So that's not exactly what happened with Kiryuu and the sword here. So I'm curious where Kiryuu learned about this that Anthe could do, where he found this out at. I'm curious how he knows this. That part is really interesting to me, right? Because the sword, the prince didn't actually come down from the castle. I was half expecting the prince to come down from the castle and get in the sword this time, but that's not what happened at all. So, okay. But yeah, so then he like knocks over a bunch of boulders behind her, saying, "Can you win against this power?" And he's like, "Go ahead and try." And she's like, "Okay, that's what I gotta do." And then the two of them fight. And the whole time, Anthony's like, she can't defeat him. She can't possibly defeat him. She's like, poor thing. I hope it's over soon. Because she doesn't want Utena to get hurt. So meanwhile, Kiryuu's just trying to get to the rose and cutting every part of her except the rose, right? And then he slices her sword in half and goes after her, but she doesn't give up. Like, so then we have the lyrics as he's like, do you see the power this sword possesses? And it says, no human has any words to speak. This is the power hidden within the Rose Bride. So we have the Rose Bride's power hidden within her, and then we have the prince's power hidden within the castle. That seems to be the two sets of powers that we have, right? The one power is the prince's and the one power is the Rose Bride's. So where that all comes from, we don't know yet, right? But Kiryuu seems to have accessed it. He's like, you posed as her prince without even knowing. But he's like, I'm her prince, not you. And says, no thing has any words to speak either. Oh. And I like that it's just this idea of him like deconstructing and tearing down all of these, like all of this normalcy she's been trying to hide behind, even though she's realized it's false. He's tried to he basically is slashing it all up. But what else do these lyrics say? Because those are just the only two lines. Only within the unchangeable darkness known as yesterday. And you still don't understand. And she's like, well, so what? Who cares if I don't understand? I know that I like Anthony and I want to keep her safe from you, you creep. So it says, only within the ungraspable glint known as now. There's something off about her. She could die, so why is she fighting this duel? Well, she's fighting this duel because she cares about you, Anthony, and she doesn't want you to get killed. So she knows she could get hurt, but to her, this is more important. It's almost like she's like, I'd rather be killed by Kiryuu than go on another day without you with me. So there. And then only within the still unilluminated darkness known as tomorrow. Okay, so only through the past, present, and future. All right, lyrics. Maybe I don't know anything about Himamiya, but I want to get back to my normal now. And then it says, within the play. And Kiryuu's like, well, pitiful. I don't understand this play business. A human can become, within a play, a human can become whoever. So yeah, it's like within a play, in an act, you can pretend to be anyone, right? All the world's a stage, right? So I feel like it's like Monster. Humans can become anything. So Anthony says it's over, Tenjo-san. A human can become whoever, and a thing can become whatever too. And then as we see the castle above, right? We see the castle overhead over the gears. And she's like, but I've seen this before. I know I have. And so then only within the unchangeable darkness known as memory. Oh, I love it. Being unchangeable, being like, this is how memory works. This is this. And Kiryuu's like, just totally fine. He's going to kill her. Totally fine. I mean, he's probably just going to knock off the rose, but still, what if he did? And that she's like, I remember. It's like what happened back then. And she sees the prince too. Only within the ungraspable glint known as creation. All right. Yep. And that's when when she sees the prince, it's like Anthony realizing, wait a minute, you're not my prince. I don't have to listen to you. You're not him. She's acting like him. I want to know more, Anthony. I want to know more. Only within the still unilluminated darkness known as tomorrow. And she stops the sword. And he's like, what? And that's within the play. I love that she pushes him back as Anthe starts to cry. And then she comes at him. Oh, actors wearing the masks of time. Yep. Dance in the play of the ancient continent. These lyrics are a little bit more straightforward. Just talking about, oh, you passengers of the galactic railway. You travelers through time and space. Dance for the 3 of 7 wonders you yearn for. 3 of 7 wonders? Now that part is a little bit more confusing. And then, yeah, he's just so shocked. Like a star, like a firefly, which is short, fleeting. And Utena's like, I'm going to take back my normal. Born with a glimmer and vanish with a glimmer. I love that shot of her just torn up with the broken sword. With Anthe. Yeah, yes. We too are born only to vanish. I mean, the whole thing is talking about that all the world's a stage. Time is fleeting. We're all actors playing our parts in the great circle of life. All of that jazz. So sure. So she's like, born with a glimmer, now vanished with a glimmer. I love it. We are born only to vanish, oh soul of mine. And then we see the two of them gather back up. Aww. And she's like, Himamiya. Born and vanished, oh star of mine. She's like, I've been waiting for you, Tina-sama. I am the Rose Bride. Here we go again. The first star, oh star of mine. From this day forward, she's like, yeah. She's like, everything's okay, Himamiya. You don't have to give me this spiel. We can go home now. Glimmer and then vanish, oh firefly star. I love him. I love Utena looks so happy again. She's like, good. You're back with me. You don't have to give me this. It's okay. In just a few dozen episodes, Utena has gone from being reluctantly like, why are you here, Anthe? Why are you following me? Why are you trying to be around me, you weirdo? To like not only accepting Himamiya, but being like, hey, it's okay. We're together again. Let's go back to the house and get away from this creepy guy, and then we can work stuff out. Growth. Character growth. I tell ya. And I love that Anthe like smiles back at her. So cute. We didn't even see what happens to Touga. Not important. I'm sure he's pissed. He's gonna be so pissed. I need him to go back to the student council meeting next week, and Miki and Jiri are like, so, couldn't help but notice you don't have the Rose Bride with you anymore. Did something happen? So, but again, our work is not completed. The work is not done, because even though Utena has Anthe back, and even though Utena has accepted that her normal is not conforming to everyone else, there's still work to be done. Utena needs to explore who she is. She needs to explore like what are her goals. Does she need to help Anthe get her autonomy? How does this work? I hope next episode that Anthe talks to Utena about what she saw during the duel. I hope she talks to her about it and explains maybe what she saw and how that's relevant. We do need at some point some information about the prince and Anthe and how all this business works. Like the Rose Bride, if Utena is going to help her break the spell of the Rose Bride, then we need to know how it works. How did this all get started? And I don't know if it's going to be something that's going to even be remotely concrete explained to us. It may never be explained to us. But I feel like we need some more info, so I'm going to be really excited for that. But we're back again, baby! I'm so excited! Yes! So, yeah. I'm super excited. I hope you all are as well. But I hope you all enjoyed this discussion and reaction. Oh, I'm so ready for episode 13 now, let me tell you. In the meantime, I hope you all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back real soon with more revolutionary girl Utena. Bye!